Welcome, everyone, to the first episode of Frost Christman, a movie based podcast where we will be discussing movies both old and new through the prism of current events and the things that we think these movies respond to in the larger culture. My name is Matt Christman. You may know me from the wildly popular podcast Chapo Trap House. And with me is my co host, Amber Ali Frost.
Hi,
Amber.
guys. Hi, how you doing?
I'm good. How are you? I'm very excited about this new podcast. What about you?
I'm good. I'm incredibly excited. We got some great movies to start out with, and the world is on fire, so that helps.
Yeah, that's the thing. It seems to me that a lot of the podcast success that I've experienced is really just people grasping for any bit of driftwood in the horrifying and continual slow sink of America into the burning oceans of death.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
I'm
I
not
mean,
going to look
really,
a gift
we're
horse in the mouth. So
culturally
let's just enjoy it.
speaking, I think we're just taking advantage of a fire sale. I mean,
Exactly. Yeah, if it's happening, if the fire's burning the house down, who are we not to get bargain basement prices on shit?
yeah, I'm not gonna
That's
not buy that divan. It's barely damaged.
exactly. Yeah, you just like put some baking soda on it or something, it'll be fine.
Yep.
So that's what we're doing. We're cleaning up in the ruins, the ever growing ruins of America. And on that note, we both thought that it would be a great way to begin our podcast adventure by talking about another time in American history that was dominated by a sense of almost universal distrust in American political institutions. A time when everyone in America was basically on the same page that the people in charge were actively malicious, had no interest in the general good, and were covering up just a host of unspeakable crimes. And I'm, of course, talking about the period directly after the Watergate scandal in the 1970s, a time that spawned an entire genre of films that you can kind of call loosely conspiracy or paranoia thrillers. And we're going to talk today about a couple of them, both directed by the great Alan Pakula. Although, for the purposes of this show, I'm going to call him Pakula because it sounds like Dracula. So, Alan Pakula in the 70s made what is kind of considered a loose trilogy called the Paranoia Trilogy. The first of them was 1971's Clute, starring Donald Sutherland and Jane Fonda in an Oscar-winning performance. We're not going to talk about that one today. Frankly, neither of us have seen it. And more importantly, it happened before Watergate broke, so it doesn't really fit the theme of films that were made in the shadow of that event and the psychic damage that it wrought in America. But then he made a couple of other films that are absolutely in the wheelhouse, and I'd say form sort of the meat of this genre. Like, these are the two best, most interesting entries in the genre of 70s paranoia thrillers.
Yeah.
Parallax View from 1974 and All the President's Men from the bicentennial year of 1976.
Right.
One of which, the first, Parallax View, is sort of a fictionalized thriller that sort of deals with the anxieties unleashed by Watergate, and then the other one, All the President's Men, which directly deals with Watergate on a factual basis, even though it's a fictional film.
Right. Yeah, it is ostensibly nonfiction, but as you sort of learn about, let's just start with All the President's Men.
Yeah, right, exactly. We're going to start with All the President's Men because, as we said, Watergate is the primal scene here. It's the event that spawned all of these other movies, spawned this generalized sense in American culture of suspicion and paranoia about government. So
Yeah.
even though Parallax View was made first, it still was made after Watergate broke, and is part of this other sort of current of films that muck around in the waters of the Watergate backwash. But All the President's Men is like the direct confrontation with the event itself. So
Yeah.
let's start with that one.
So speaking of formative, I saw this for the first time in high school. I think whatever, my history teacher was hungover or something and popped in All the President's Men. And and I remember thinking it was so good for all the dumb high school reasons that you think a movie is good. Like, first of all, as a film, it's like it's kind of ridiculous. I mean, it's almost, it's like put together like noir. Like, I mean, there the shots of like deep throat, like they could be like German expressionists. There's this like hit of light across, blue light across his eyes, and the dialogue at times can be really choppy, and it's more conversational than like an actual noir or whatever. But like, it for a nonfiction film, especially that period, it's extremely stylized, and I thought it was so cool. And I didn't really understand Watergate. I knew it was a break-in, at the time. I didn't know that it led to the exposure of like, a lot more, mass corruption and coordinated corruption at the highest level. So it made this like massive impression on me, but in a very high school way where I just ended up being like, well, like freedom of the press is like the cornerstone of our democracy. Like, just this very like immature interpretation of it, because it's just like a cool movie. I mean,
well, yeah, and it is very much an attempt to make heroes out of newsmen.
Oh, totally. The like, nerds. And oh my god, too. Later, but when you actually look too at pictures of Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein, and like,
they're trolls. Bernstein specifically, he looks like he lived under a bridge for at least a few years.
Yeah, but in that movie, okay, so you had Dustin Hoffman managing to kind of like, even like, despite looking like Dustin Hoffman, like out-sex his co-star who plays like this square nerd.
Hoffman's hair in All the President's Men is a fucking.
Yeah, and he's also just kind of like the most charming kind of sleaze. Like, you're very attractive, like that thing or whatever. Right. And it's like, good for you, Dustin Hoffman.
He's the more hard driving guy, because the whole time there's an interesting tension.
He's better at his job.
Bernstein in the film, where Bernstein is always the one sort of making assumptions and sort of driving forward and saying, this is conspiracy. We're finding evidence that the White House is involved in this, and at every point. Woodward is basically a fucking nerd,
right?
In many words, I think I don't know about that. We need to check our sources.
I'm a Republican. Yeah,
who knows what happened? You're like, shut up, bitch.
Yeah, he doesn't know what he's doing. He shoots himself in the foot so many times. It's you have good on Robert Redford for being willing to take. He's like, I'm gonna play an absolute square.
Yes, it's sort of recapitulated noir, but the hero is no longer a cop or a private detective. He is a reporter.
Yeah.
And that's the main, like, even more than Nixon. Nixon's very much in the background of All the President's Men. He only appears on screen in acting, or I mean on film, like during his inaugural address or something. The real star is
and there was so much
reporting of journalism.
There was so much classically romantic treatment of it. They wanted it to look, whatever, I guess documentarian or whatever, but like with these cool noir-y stylized things to it. But it was so invested in creating these heroes, these great truth tellers, that like one of the big complaints by historians about the film is that it eliminated all of these other people. I mean, it had Ben Bradley in it. But like there were a ton of people involved in at the Post, washing, ensuring that this information came to light, and supporting like not very popular investigative work, or highly controversial investigative work. And so some of the complaints was that it actually like eliminated people. From the story.
Not just people at the Post, but there's an interesting subplot in the movie where you get the impression that what's really driving them is much less some sort of abstract desire for the truth, but a competition with the New York Times.
Yeah.
because there's a
and
whole thing
horniness.
where the New
They're
York
very
Times
horny.
breaks a story about calls going from the Watergate burglars to the White House and them being pissed that they didn't get that scoop, and
it is such a high tea film
to get it back.
It is such a high tea film. Like, they're highly competitive guys. They're, at least Dustin Hoffman in it, you know, portrays Bernstein as kind of a poonhound. You know, there's all kinds of, like, you know, cool, mean lines in it that are just, like, so, you know, clearly ridiculously stylized. It's a very dudely movie. It's like a cool guy movie.
Their tea is almost as high as their pants.
I love the high pants. I love the thick ties.
There's some 70s fashion in this movie.
The ties, they're like canoes, the ties. They're amazing. The fashion is great. The cars in it are great. Aesthetically, it's amazing.
Massive boats.
Yeah,
big pants, big cars, big pants. What has happened to America?
I know.
Driving around in smart cars wearing skinny jeans.
Yeah, Bernstein's cool-ass apartment is just, you know, there's just, like, weird glass vases. I've been to journalists' apartment. They don't look like that. Journalists do not have an eye for bohemian design.
Yeah, I remember thinking that, too, that Bernstein's place looked baller.
Yeah, it looks like a bachelor pad.
Bohemian crib. Like, that's the total place you bring a girl for fondue. She just, you know that she starts unbuttoning the blouse like half an hour into it. It's like, damn, Bernstein. That's how you bag Nora Ephron.
Yeah. I think thinking in terms of graphics for this episode, which I think we're calling Ratfucking, we should use an actual picture of Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein.
Yeah. Yes, the gritty reality beneath the Hollywood gossamer imagery.
Oh, so let's talk a little about Ratfucking.
Yeah. Yes, Ratfucking, exactly. That's a practice that is described in the film when they meet and interview Donald Segretti, who is one of the creep operatives, and it was the process by which you basically in intelligence terms, it's black propaganda, where you make fake documents ascribed to your opponent in order to undermine their credibility. And they talk a bit about it in All the President's Men, although the real focus is on the money flows, because, as we all remember, Deep Throat saying, follow the money. And it's mostly about the funding of the Watergate break-in through the Committee to Re-elect the President and how that related to the White House people, like John Marshall, the former Attorney General and Nixon's campaign manager in 1972. But Ratfucking, there's a nice scene where they talk to Donald Segretti and they talk about
that performance is great.
Hits of the 1972 Ratfucking campaign, which included most famously and probably most effectively the Canuck letter, which was a document where someone wrote into a New Hampshire newspaper claiming to have heard frontrunner and 1968 vice presidential nominee Edmund Muskie make a disparaging comment about French Canadians, which was damaging in heavily French Canadian New Hampshire. And that led to this like snowballing of effect, accusations about Muskie's wife being an alcoholic, and culminated in Muskie doing a
well, they didn't just like put out these rumors. They stole his stationery.
They did, because they would have people volunteer for the campaigns, and then when they were in the campaign offices, grab the stationery so that they would have
they had
and send it out. Yeah,
they had him on Muskie's stationery. They apparently accused a senator of having like an illegitimate child. Like it's just scandalizing. These politicians.
And, it all culminated in Muskie doing a press conference outdoors in the winter in New Hampshire where he defended his wife's honor, and it looked like he cried. There's still dispute to this day about whether he did cry, whether it was the snow, but either way, it destroyed him. He was done.
Yeah.
And the only guy who didn't get rat-fucked was the guy that Nixon wanted to face, and that was George McGovern, who he then dutifully did face and destroy, which is... And there's a funny background to this movie, is that all throughout the film, while they're because this is that's the kind of perverse and interesting thing about it, is that it doesn't cover the entire Watergate investigation or
it couldn't.
even
It
the
would be
post
too
role
long.
in
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
It's just the early, like the first 6 months basically after the break-in, when Woodward and Bernstein are doing the initial stories. And so it ends it ends on Nixon's inaugural. So, but a background to all these scenes, like they're talking to these people, they're finding out more about Watergate, and you keep hearing about things like the Eagleton disaster, where it was discovered that Thomas Eagleton, McGovern's vice presidential nominee, had electroshock therapy that nobody had known about, and they eventually had to kick him off the ticket. So you're getting these things that show that the campaign of McGovern is totally fucked. They have no way of winning, and that all of this stuff, all of this rat fucking, and specifically the Watergate break-in, are totally superfluous because Nixon's going to cruise to re-election anyway.
Yup.
But he still did this thing. They still did this thing that was going to doom him. So it's like a kind of an ironic counterpoint to everything going on. But if we want to talk about contemporary parallels, a guy who's been in the news lately, Roger Stone, the man who's now sort of the thug voice of sort of unbridled Trumpism, the guy who's now vowing to put people in the streets to fight back if Hillary wins, on the assumption that any Hillary victory will be through electoral fraud.
Sure.
Although I would honestly advise him to check in on what the BMI of the average Trump supporter is before he vows that he's going to have these guys fighting in the streets.
Yeah.
But he got his start in 1972 as one of Rick Nixon's rat fuckers.
Yep.
He was there on the ground floor. And the funniest story about that is that one of his early missions was he was supposed to donate to, I believe it was the Muskie campaign, on behalf of like the Homosexual Alliance or some group like that. He was going to write a check with that as the organization, and then they were going to show, oh, look who's donating to Muskie. But he was worried that people would think he was gay, so he changed it to like the Young Communist League or something.
No homo.
Because no homo. Yeah. Roger Stone, no homo. He might like orgies. He might be a fan of orgies, but not gay ones. He keeps away from the dick and balls when the orgies are happening. He wants you to know that.
You know, I think we were like hoping for like the most like horrifying type of like rat fucking from the DNC email leak. But what came out of it, a lot of it was just incredibly inept and weird. But one of the things that stuck out to me was, and I think there's a thing by Ari Paul in the forward about this that went over. They're trying to do like a sort of like they considered like a contemporary kind of anti-Semitism, not like he killed our Lord, but like with one of the emails from the CFO Brad Marshall of the DNC was saying it might make no difference, but for Kentucky and West Virginia, can we get someone to ask his belief? Which, astroturfing, organic comments from the crowd is a huge rat fucking thing. And I said, does he believe in a god? He had skated on saying he has Jewish heritage. I think I read he's an atheist. This could make several points difference with my peeps. My Southern Baptist peeps would draw a big difference between a Jew and an atheist. My peeps.
Yeah, that's how far we've fallen.
I know, it's almost like they're just such failures now.
Well, they're low T fucking lanyard.
You know what it is?
Sports.
It's because they're Democrats.
Yeah, they never had it. They never had the gut instinct.
Yeah, they didn't have the taste for the jugular, as they said. And
well, I mean, a lot of that is because like these Republican guys, they've been forging this sort of ruthlessness in college Republican politics for 40 years now. I mean, that's where the guys who got Goldwater the nomination learned their trade. It's where Karl Rove learned his trade.
Yeah,
but
Rove.
I have a feeling that I was not a college Democrat, but I have a feeling that their blood runs a little weaker than the college Republicans.
Yeah. I was a college Democratic Socialist, and we were a disparate bunch, but we thought the college Democrats were bitches, so... Uh, that was our impression of them, as ineffectual as we were.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
So, yeah, I mean, like that's the weird thing though about this movie is that it's viewed as like this triumph of whatever of nonfiction, fictionalization or whatever. But it's not it's not the best, the most informative, view of the Watergate scandal. I think it is good because it doesn't reduce it to like, oh, there was a break-in a hotel.
Yeah.
But like, you're not going to get the best overview of like the mass corruption at the highest
No,
levels.
it's got an incredible amount of detail, but it's very, very narrowly focused on the very specific stories that Woodward and Bernstein were writing in the immediate aftermath of the break-in.
Yeah.
And I think part of that is because the audience knew the broad outlines of the story by that point. They were familiar with it. So it really was a question of, well, what story are we going to tell? Because they know the whole thing. We're not going to have Sam Ervin up there yelling from the Judiciary Committee, chair or whatever. They saw that on TV. We got to give them something they haven't seen before.
Yeah.
And what they hadn't seen and what nobody had seen was a heroic narrative of Watergate. And so what they were offering
not just heroic, cool. Yes, like Ben absolutely. Bradley with his fucking shoes on the desk, and
yeah. No, oh god, Robards is so cool.
Oh, he's so cool. He's the coolest guy in the movie. Yes, he's got that voice. I would
say that, Jason Robards' Ben Bradley is one of the coolest dudes in any movie ever in this thing. So yes, it like gives you someone to root for. It gives you a narrative of heroism and cool in a situation that did not really have that in the public face of it, and so. That's why they do this narrow focus, and that's really what it does more than anything. I think that the thing that stuck with me is that last shot. The very last shot is they have just been dealt a massive setback. Like a guy who they had used as a source in a story has repudiated what he told them, and that left them with egg on their face, and there were a lot of pressure on the Post to pull the stories or fire them. And it's this shot of a television showing Nixon's second inaugural.
Yep.
And in the background are Woodward and Bernstein on their typewriters.
Yeah.
And the sound is those clattering typewriters. And it's just the idea you get in your head watching it is, oh, these guys, they're going to win. They're going to get this guy.
Yeah,
this dude, he thinks he got away with it, but they're back there and they're just slowly sharpening their knives that are going to cut his heart out.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's like it is a way to offer this triumph. And that's interesting because one thing that the rest of the movies that kind of fed off of that same experience of Watergate had in common is that they're very grim and they're very pessimistic about America. They're contemptuous of the idea of heroism, the idea of defeating these negative forces that control our lives. And one of them is the film that Pakula made before All the President's Men, 3 years before, or 2 years before, called Parallax View, which in our notes you have a great pithy description of what.
Oh yeah, a friend actually. I was watching this with a friend because I hadn't seen it before, so I was like, boning up, and he was like, "This is like if All the President's Men were a Dukes of Hazzard episode."
It absolutely is.
It so is. It's like, journalist got himself in a sticky situation again. How's he gonna get out of this one?
And there is a car chase.
Oh my god, the car chase is great too.
And Warren Beatty, who's the hero, is trying to escape this like Bubba rural deputy, and they like the cars get covered in mud, and one of them crashes through a general store. It's incredibly Dukes of Hazzard.
There's so much activity in that movie. There's no, like periods of like dense dialogue or anything. Actually, let's. Do you want to like give people sort of a synopsis of the Parallax View?
Yeah. So the Parallax View starts with the assassination of a maverick, I guess we're sort of led to believe left-wing senator as he's addressing a party at the top of the Space Needle in Seattle.
Yeah, he's saying I'm not beholden to anyone. I'm so independent. You're very optimistic about this guy. You like him immediately.
His last words are literally something like, "Some people think I'm too independent," and then he gets riddled with bullets.
Yeah, and it's a shock too. I didn't see it coming. It's beautifully shot.
Oh yeah, you're behind the glass, like you're watching it behind glass, and you see his back, and then the glass gets covered in blood. It's very upsetting and abrupt. And one of the waiters, one of the guys in waiter livery, has a hilarious sort of Keystone Cops race to try to get to the top of the Space Needle, and he ends up falling off of it and dying.
Yeah.
And he's sort of the guy who's fingered as the assassin. But we see that there was another gunman. We see a gunman who puts a gun away and escapes.
Yeah, I mean, the Kennedy assassination parallels
behind a table.
The Kennedy assassination parallels here are kind of obvious. Like, there was all this promise, and there's this sudden insane violence.
Right.
That this very public
commission.
Yeah.
Behind desks who intone the result of their inquiry, which is that the assassination was by one lone gunman and there was no evidence of a conspiracy. So that sort of sets the situation up. But then we focus on Warren Beatty, who's the star of the film, playing, like a lot of these movies, the stars of a lot of these other movies, a journalist who is visited by, I think, is an ex-girlfriend who was a witness to the assassination. She's
a hysterical woman. This is another very high T film.
Yes. Oh God. Yeah. She's basically the only female character, and I'm surprised he didn't do the old slap her in the face to try to stop being hysterical.
I think that was probably considered. That's how. I mean, I don't want to be I joke about these being high T films. They are incredibly sexist.
Oh yeah.
But I'm just not that kind of moralizing feminist. I think we can accept that they're sexist and move on.
Yeah, no, we sort of have to assume that any movie about a badass taking on the power in the 60s and 70s is not going to be very considerate of gender equity.
Yeah, it's just a lot of pussy hounds with shaggy hair and a take no prisoners attitude. that's
basically
that's Pakula's ideal man.
Oh yeah, and speaking of that, they have to try to get information out of a half a dozen hysterical broads in All the President's Men.
Oh yeah.
There are all these women who work at Creep who they try to get stuff out of, and they're all just on the verge of tears at all times.
Right. Well, they
have to apply their machismo on them to get them to admit what happened.
Yeah, the first major tip they got is from just some girl on the Hill. And it's, Dustin Hoffman chain smoking, you're very attractive.
yeah, totally.
And I gotta say, he sells it.
Yeah. So this hysterical female claims that someone wants to kill her, that all these other witnesses have died. He gives her the high hat. But next shot is her on a slab in the morgue, which, even though she just warned him that she was next, she was going to be killed. And they tell her that, she OD'd on barbiturates on the wheel of a car. But he is now okay, this is bullshit. And he takes a journey around the country and ends up discovering that there's this organization called the Parallax Corporation, whose job it is to cultivate and then rent out lone gunmen for anybody who can pay for them.
Yep.
And what's interesting about it is, as opposed to other films that we're going to talk about later, the conspiracy here is very nebulous. That we never really get any idea of the motives of the people who hire the Parallax Corporation,
or why they require weird brainwashing, why this is the most productive way to get gunmen for hire. Either there's kind of a plot hole there. You can just find a psycho who has good aim.
Yeah. But basically what it's trying to do is just evoke that sense that there is a force there basically acting against democracy. The idea that if anything pushes too far against the restraints of the American two-party system, it will be brought down by some force or another that can pay these guys to get a gunman to do it. And in 1974, I mean, that had to have been how everybody felt.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. There was also a bit of sense of, I mean, at that point they were starting to, I mean, it was 7 years past Summer of Love, like, some of the idealism, it was still a highly political time. I think people think of the 60s as being, like, the most, there was the time when everyone was in the streets. There were tons of people in the streets in the early and mid 70s, but it didn't quite have this utopian kind of idealism anymore.
Yeah, it didn't have like the hippie edge anymore. It was sort of sliding into cynicism and anger. I mean, that is the time when the weathermen broke off from SDS and started blowing up bathrooms because
and themselves sometimes,
sort of sense of pervasive frustration. Yes, hilariously. That sense of pervasive frustration that shit, there's really no way to get through this, and that's what these movies really represent. Is just this breathtaking paralysis that comes over you when you look upon the political system you live in and realize that there is no changing it, that there's too much concentrated wealth and influence at the top. And these things are really just dramatizations of that feeling.
Right, and a sort of like anxious fantasy about it too. Like in the very Freudian sense, it's not just Parallax View isn't just All the President's Men if it were a Dukes of Hazzard episode. There's also like a nice sprinkling of Manchurian Candidate in there.
Oh yeah,
because they didn't know what it looked like, so they imagined it. Yeah, they didn't know what the corruption looked like. Sorry.
They don't just get guys off the street and say, like, hey, you shoot this guy. It's this multi-stage recruitment process.
Yeah.
There's a questionnaire you have to fill out.
And you have to figure out if you're psycho.
Right. And if you score psycho enough on the test, then you go to the next stage. And this is the thing that really the Parallax View is the most remembered for. I think it's the highlight of the film. It comes about halfway through. Warren Beatty has taken on an assumed identity and has gotten the test taken on his behalf by a murderous mental patient, so that he would score high. And on the basis of that test, he's been given the next round. And the next round is he goes to the Parallax headquarters, and they strap him into a chair, and they show him this 6-minute montage film.
Yeah.
That's deeply unsettling, and I think really
it's a brainwashing scene, basically. Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's the thing. It's kind of ambiguous. I mean, sometimes I watch it and I think that they're trying to brainwash them, and other times I think they're trying to like gauge their responses to it. See if
it's a test. Should be. See, I interpret it immediately as like as breakdown torture, you know.
Yeah.
But maybe that's just because that's where I think of Clockwork Orange, and I think of that kind of like whatever cinematic violation and media torture has just like a strong context in my head. But I could see it being the other way too. Yeah.
Yeah, but either way, it's a fascinating thing. It starts off very slow paced. It gives you prompt words like home, mother, father.
Yeah.
Along with them, you get these images that are meant to evoke those things. You know, like a family around the dinner table, Norman Rockwell, a picket fenced house, that kind of stuff. And then you get things like God, and you get, a Congregationalist church with a nice white steeple.
Yeah.
And you get enemy, and there's Hitler, and there's the Nazis, and then you get God again, and it starts to go faster and faster, and it starts, most crucially, to start mingling everything together before every prompt. And one of the prompts is me, and it shows images of a child in various stages, often of distress.
Yeah.
Like a child running away from a guy who looks like he's going to beat him up, a child huddled up sort of in a dank room.
Again, too, like the sort of crude fantasy Freudianism of like the Manchurian Candidate in there. This is inner child talk and stuff. Yeah.
And then it starts to really jumbled up. The pace of the editing is faster and faster. It includes lots of images of sex, both homoerotic and heterosexual.
How woke.
And then you get dead people. You get bullets. You get blood. You got General MacArthur kind of screaming. And then the most interesting thing is, in the midst of this maelstrom of images of violence, you get this repeated shot of Thor from the Marvel comics just standing, and then it keeps repeating to that with the phrase "me." And what it felt like to me is just the whole thing, the whole montage is designed to sort of evoke these feelings of confusion and aggression, and then posit violence as sort of the answer to this sort of stirred up emotional state. Because once it reaches the climax, it then goes back to the soothing rhythms that had happened before, sort of implying that this powerful wave of threat and anxiety have been pacified by the embodied man sort of exercising violence on his own behalf.
Yeah, I would agree.
But what's most interesting is that a lot of the images, and I think this is intentional, are really things that were in advertising. The kind of one-to-one representations of American ideals that you saw in ads, both print and television, around in the 60s and 70s. And
yeah, well, there was a lot of paranoia at the time about subliminal messaging in advertising,
right, yeah.
too.
Yeah, and it totally feeds into that. It feels like the commentary is sort of like the culture we live in is giving these messages, because there were all these guys shooting presidents and senators almost at random during this period of time.
Yeah.
And like, if you're not positing that it's the government, then you still have to answer for why are these guys doing this. And that montage sort of has the purpose of showing, well, even if there isn't some conspiracy to manufacture these people, our culture is manufacturing them.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think also there was sort of that this was there was an anti-consumerist bent to all of this as well. People had a kind of a vague sort of anti-industrial, anti-consumerist, like a kind of misplaced mistrust of what I would say is capital, but maybe not having, necessarily those words to articulate it.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think it was bipartisan. I think everybody kind of had that anxiety.
Absolutely, yeah, and it's understandable. I mean,
yeah, totally.
It's sort of that's always, I think, been like sort of cyclical, and the way it's manifested has been very different. I'm glad that we're sort of like out of. Nothing makes me happier than the fact that like Adbusters is like a laughing stock now.
Yeah.
And
at some point you have to get over that.
Yeah, and like you have
to deal with the world as it is.
Yeah, and that this isn't a moral position. It's that people are incentivized in certain ways, and they exist in these systems and whatever. But for the your most base impulse, I think suddenly being inundated with advertising and with urbanization is that just like, oh, this is the conspiracy. Like this, they're controlling all these aspects of our lives with technology and advertising, and the conspiracy is the same conspiracy as the whatever. It's the first industrial revolution factory conspiracy. It's just more elaborated upon.
Yeah, because we want to put a face to it. We don't want to believe that it's just this impersonal force.
Yeah,
that it's just the logic of capitalism and technology.
It's hard.
Hand in hand.
It's hard to wrap your brain around. Yeah.
Yeah. And I feel like these movies, like, they kind of half-assedly do that because they are very pessimistic. The way this film ends, the way the Parallax View ends, is he gets Warren Beatty is able to infiltrate this organization. They give him a job, and he goes to a rally for this right-wing presidential candidate who I think is there to sort of represent George Wallace and the idea that basically anybody, regardless of their ideology, who pressed against the status quo was going to get smacked down, and they're in that era.
Yeah. By the way, the senator was George Hammond. Is
George
that
Hammond.
yeah, it was just like, right on the nose.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there's this great, again, too, visually. He's running around in the catwalks, and again, it's like very like geometric, and you can kind of see like, okay, this is how this became like the serious or more serious director of All the President's Men. It's a really ambitious movie.
Because it totally defeats traditional action.
Yeah.
Like, all the action scenes are filmed at wide angles and long distances. There's very little close-up. There's very little music. It's basically designed. It actually kind of reminds me of like the '60s Godard movies in that sense. In that
it does.
It really sort of defeats traditional ideas of suspense and action.
Yeah, I think
it wants everything to get swallowed up by the surroundings. Because at the end, after they shoot, he realizes he's getting set up. They shoot Hammond, and then there's this great shot of him just shot dead in his golf cart, crashing into all these red, white, and blue tables. That it's sort of from a super wide angle, and then it's just him running around and hiding on the catwalk, but at all times at a super wide angle with no music.
Yeah.
At every point,
I think Pakula, I think he definitely had some kind of reverence for like the French anti-romanticism.
Yes.
Which is ridiculous because he loves a romantic hero, but like visually, it's very French. It's not.
Well, I agree. I agree that basically what happened is by then the French New Wave was so influential that was what good filmmaking was supposed to look like.
Yeah.
That's what serious filmmaking.
That's how you know it's serious.
Like.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, oh yeah, you shoot them from 5 miles away and there's no music. That's a good movie. That is a challenging good movie.
That's a grown-up movie. That's a movie for grown-ups.
Yeah. But he's running around on the catwalk and he's locked out. People are saying, there he is.
Yeah.
And finally, there's an open door at the end of this catwalk and he's running towards it at full speed. And a dude just steps out and blows him away.
Yeah.
And then the next scene is we're back to that almost. It's pretty much. I think it might even be the same actors behind the same desk from the committee at the beginning of the movie, reading another statement saying that this assassination was carried out by Warren Beatty. There's no conspiracy, and everybody needs to move on. Yeah.
By the way, I hate to keep bringing this up, but Manchurian Candidate also ends assassination on catwalk.
That's true, but that's the crucial difference, though, isn't it? In the Manchurian Candidate, Lawrence Harvey breaks his conditioning and shoots his asshole stepfather and his evil mom.
Yeah, he gets through, and then he shoots himself, and it's violent, gory, and tragic, and meaningless, but in a different way. Yeah,
has been preserved.
Yeah. But I love this, it all culminates at a rally, and a violent act at a rally, which is, it's still a preoccupation with assassination. I honestly think, like, Kennedy's assassination was just such, like, a startling event that it became, like, visually inescapable for a lot of filmmakers afterwards.
And but what's interesting is the way that it didn't really manifest in film too much until after Watergate, because even if people had questions about the Kennedy assassination, I think the idea of publicly expressing them was something that didn't really become possible until Watergate made it possible.
Yeah.
Watergate made challenging government at a basic level in terms of its benevolence and its the notion that it's doing these conspiracies, that it has no interest in democracy. Those sort of thoughts, I think, were still largely unspeakable, even with Vietnam and everything. And it really did take Watergate to break through that psychic barrier, at least when it comes to Hollywood films.
Yeah. No, I agree.
But, so, those are the ones we're talking. Those are the two. I'd say those are the best conspiracy movies of the 70s.
Peak conspiracy, yeah.
There are a couple others that I wanted to talk about briefly here that kind of round out the genre. And they go from sort of the boring to the ridiculous to, I think, the ridiculously kind of brilliant. The first is a movie that came out a year before the Parallax View called Executive Action, which starred Robert Ryan and Burt Lancaster. And what's interesting about this movie is that this is 10 years after the Kennedy assassination, and it is a film that is just the story of the conspiracy to assassinate JFK told by the assassins.
Yeah.
Like there's no investigation, there's no hero. The protagonists in the film are the people who kill Kennedy. And it starts with them in a room with a bunch of government officials and generals and oil men going, this Kennedy is getting too liberal. We got to take care of him.
Yeah.
And then Burt Lancaster shows up as like this CIA guy who's like, I can show you how to do it. And then step by step, they just show them preparing for the assassination, doing weapons tests, having conversations about how white people are going to get inundated by 7 billion black and brown people, and how Kennedy has to die so that the Vietnam War can thin out the ranks of the third world.
Right.
It's like just this brazen. It sort of is like JFK with just no artistry at all. It's not a good movie, but it's interesting that anyone would make a movie like that.
Yeah, and it could only exist because of sort of like the atmosphere of the time. Yeah, I haven't actually seen that one. I have seen, however, Capricorn 1.
Yes,
which has my man Elliot Gould in it.
Super serious.
Speaking of high tea men of the 70s, Elliot Gould, and it has Sam Waterston in it.
But not only do you have schlubby ass Elliot Gould as the lead, he's a reporter.
Yeah,
because those were the heroes in the 70s, were those heroic journalists. But yes, we've gone from Executive Action, which is this sort of grim look into the abyss of American conspiracy theories and deep state actions, to Capricorn 1.
Which is crazy. It's a ridiculous concept.
Of a faked Martian landing.
Yeah.
Clearly inspired by the people who didn't believe that the moon landing was real.
Yeah, I gotta say, I think this is, like, it's a fun movie. And here's how I'm gonna sell it. Elliot Gould, James Brolin, Sam Waterston, O.J. Simpson, and they're astronauts.
As an astronaut, folks. If you ever
they're
astronauts.
astronauts.
O.J. was an astronaut.
It's so good. I mean, it's not good, but it's good.
Well, I haven't actually seen it.
You haven't seen it? Oh my god, you have to. It's ridiculous.
I know that, they're gonna go to Mars, but then there's a problem with the ship, but they don't want to admit it because the Soviets, right, or something, and so they take them out to the desert and have them fake it.
Yeah, also, Telly Savalas. Sorry, I forgot that. It's just such a product of its time. It's a beautiful little time capsule. So they filmed the Mars landing in a studio, and and then it's, cover up, and people trying to hide this information, and the sort of political significance of we have to be the first on Mars. It's ridiculous. It is hijinks ensue, but it takes itself very seriously, which makes it fun.
Oh, absolutely. There's nothing funnier than something like that. Really, hey man, we're telling the truth.
Yeah.
What can you even believe what you see on TV?
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, compared to these other ones, it's positively whimsical. Oh, they're staging the Martian landing. That's adorable.
Yeah. And, what would that even mean if they staged the Martian landing? What would it mean even if we staged the moon landing? Nothing. It would mean nothing.
That's what's so funny about people who take that as their conspiracy that they give a shit about.
Yeah.
Is that the implications are basically nothing.
It just, it made people feel good. It was a happy fiction, or,
Yeah. It's like, hey man, Tang's still around. Even if we didn't go to the moon, we still got Velcro and Tang out of something.
Yeah.
So in terms of my life, the space program's fine with me. I don't care if they fake it. Just give me that Tang.
Yeah. Plus, what, you sound like a 70s journalist now.
I gotta feather my hair a little bit.
Yeah. No, yeah. Oh, and also we basically got the technology to know that we are boiling ourselves on this planet from NASA, so that's helpful.
Yeah, that's great.
I
That kind of takes the edge off of everything, really.
I
It's like,
kind of wonder if that isn't part of like the right wing's turn away from, obviously, like the end of the Cold War, but the right wing's turn away from NASA and space exploration. Okay, so they don't have to whip out their dicks anymore for the Soviets, but also, NASA is made up of scientists, and they're all saying, "Hey, we have a carbon problem." And like, no, it's bullshit, NASA. What the fuck have they ever done? And I
well,
honestly think like climate change denialism has sort of suppressed even the sort of decent kind of frontierism that you could find on the right wing. That's just like, well,
that's true,
there's
yeah.
a space out there to explore, and we can colonize. Maybe there'll be people there, and we can force them to work on plantations. Like there's none of that ambition anymore.
Yeah, and they do say that the modern ecology movement was started when people saw those images from the moon landings of Earth, the
Yeah,
little
yeah.
blue marble pictures. So like that's like, oh, you bastards! You're the reason that there's Earth Day, you motherfuckers.
Yeah, I think that's a big part of it.
Yeah, but so we talked a bit about the Manchurian Candidate, which is very appropriate because the Manchurian Candidate was based on a novel by Richard Condon,
Mm-hmm.
and Richard Condon also wrote a novel, also about assassinations. That was the basis for the last film that we're going to talk about in the '70s paranoia canon, and that is Winter Kills from 1979.
I've never seen
starring
Winter
Jeff
Kills.
Bridges. Oh, it's really good. If you can get a hold of it, if anybody's listening, get a hold of it. This movie, I think, better than any of the ones we've discussed, captures the sort of psychic reality of trying to get in your head what it means to live in a world where democratic mechanisms, where trust in government have all been subverted to the point where you can't really know anything. That's sort of the theme of Winter Kills. And this movie took years to get to the screen, partly because its first producers were a pair of marijuana dealers, one of whom was killed by the mafia, and the other of whom was sentenced to 40 years in prison during pre-production.
Okay.
So it took a couple times to get the funding together after that happened for Winter Kills to happen. And it stars Jeff Bridges as the sort of ne'er-do-well half-brother of a slain president who is clearly in the model of JFK. The family is the Kennedys. His dad is this Joseph Kennedy-style crook, and he is this sort of idealistic Bobby Kennedy if he hadn't gone into politics after the assassination. And he finds out from this man who had been working on an oil derrick, who confesses that he was the second gunman when his brother was killed, and that leads him on this insane adventure through every permutation of potential suspects in a Kennedy assassination.
Okay, so the disorienting paranoia.
Yeah,
like you don't know what way's up.
Sterling Hayden plays this sort of right-wing industrialist who sort of stands in for the oil men and military-industrial complex guys that are often fingered. He's got this big beard and he's riding around a tank. It's pretty awesome. He meets like Cuban agents and CIA people. He meets the mafia. There's this great scene where he goes into this butcher shop to meet a mafia head guy, and the whole room is filled with mob guys who are in black trench coats, just like standing around and sitting on shelves and shit, just
awesome.
Like everywhere that you wouldn't imagine a person would be, like murder of crows.
Awesome.
It's really visually very awesome. Until he finally finds out, after all this pinging around, that maybe, just maybe, the guy who killed his brother was his father, played by John Huston, in very much doing a Noah Cross Chinatown character again. But the whole movie is filled with false leads, blind alleys. Everybody he talks to ends up getting killed, and at the end he falls out of a building. So it really kind of caps on that whole decade of people trying to get in their heads what had happened between the Kennedy assassination, the Vietnam War, Pentagon Papers, Watergate, the pardon of Richard Nixon, and everything that went along with it.
Yeah. And you got the Ford administration, which healed all wounds.
It really did. It fixed everything.
Yeah.
So that's the time. That's the last time I think that we really saw people in popular culture grapple with a complete collapse in faith in government. Because after that, 1979 Winter Kills followed closely after that by the election of Ronald Reagan and the collective decision to just bury all of that shit. To just put it down deep where nobody would notice and just press on and pretend it had never happened.
Yeah.
And the films of the 80s reflect that reality.
Well, where do you think we are now? Because we don't have the film industry that we had. I talk about this a lot. It's, we don't have mid-budget films anymore, so movies like these, which were weird even for their time, obviously don't get made. I don't know that we quite have the barometer artistically for this stuff.
No, it'll be interesting to see if I feel like we're gonna just not be able to tell because everything's a goddamn indie movie about guys trying to fuck their sister-in-law, or they're about fucking comic book guys slamming each other in the dick.
Yeah.
It really does seem like there's nowhere in the middle for you to really create something. I feel like maybe there are a few directors who, if they can get funding, could do something interesting with this, like Tony Gilroy.
I think I don't think it's a question of talent. I just think these projects.
Yes, the money, yeah. Because I think a movie that is in this model, I think that responds to the time well, at least the time of like the late Bush years, was Michael Clayton.
Okay.
Have you seen that movie?
I haven't seen Michael Clayton. I'm aware of it.
It came out in 2007, which is often talked of as like a landmark year for American film. Where There Will Be Blood came out, No Country for Old Men, and so it kind of gets forgotten sometimes. But it's a genuinely great movie, and it deals in a lot of these themes. It feels like it could have been a product of that era.
Yeah.
But sadly, like he made a movie a few years later, that bombed with Julia Roberts.
Sure.
And I don't know. He's probably going to be writing Bourne movies until the end of time now. So yeah. So we're gonna. I don't know. I guess we're gonna have to take our anxieties to the internet.
Yeah, we're all just gonna be making conspiracy-based YouTube series. That'll be my next project, by the way.
Yeah. It's like loose change and shit like that. That's, I guess, the modern equivalent of this stuff.
Yeah, it's very zine-based. Paranoia is now very zine-based. Or
zines and memes.
Yeah, zines and memes.
Like go to Facebook.
Harambe was an inside job.
Let us leave you with that, folks. Harambe was an inside job.